Can Tom Brady win another Super Bowl? Are the Bucs defense actually a little bit overrated? And is Byron Leftwich actually the Bucs' Achilles heel?
Welcome, Kings, to this edition of the Not Your Daddy's Sports Betting Podcast stream, presented by SportfolioKings, the future of plus EV sports betting research, where we leverage fundamental handicapping, data science, and Wall Street-style portfolio management principles to help make you a sharper, more informed, better.
Preseason 2021, so we're diving into all 32 teams over the course of the summer. We're going to be evaluating market expectations, providing you with our preliminary analyses, predictions as we head into week one. So let's talk some Buccaneers football. Obviously, the reigning champions of the league. Let's take a look back to kick off with a little bit of a 2020 recap. So we can see, going into last year, there was a lot of high expectations for this team. Estimated, that futures win total was priced around 9.5 wins. They ended up going over. We had definitely had a strong bias to the over for the Bucs last year as well. We can see that they covered pretty handedly when they did cover, covering by almost 4 points there. When they won their games, they also won quite decisively, winning by almost more than a touchdown by, seeing the average margin of victory there at 8.6 points. Realized strength of schedule 23rd, so not too difficult of a schedule. And we saw, over the course of the season, this is one thing that we talked about a lot in last season's preseason preview, Zach, was that, we expected a bumpy ride for the Bucs over the first course of, let's say the first half or so of the season. As there was a lot of moving pieces, obviously Tom Brady's first year, Gronk's first year, bringing in Antonio Brown, so a lot of, chemistry issues, certainly that first half of the year. And we definitely saw that, especially in the middle of the year when pretty much all of the bandwagon kind of Buccaneer supporters started to abandon ship, particularly as we can see on the chart here. Again, the Bucs performed really well against the spread over the course of the season, but we can see that outlier week in week 9 when they just got absolutely demolished, just didn't show up. I believe that was versus the Saints on national TV. So, just especially relevant to just a broader audience, kind of seeing that very tepid performance. And there was already kind of building concerns at that point in time. And that was pretty much when everyone said, it's not going to happen this year. It's just not going to come around. And I remember we were very active on Twitter that night when there was just so much commotion and so much commentary on how, this Bucs team is so overrated. Look out for the Saints. And in that particular week, again, we were bullish on the Bucs. I remember that particular week, we actually bet on the Saints. We thought that was actually a very bad point in time, given the broader kind of relative contextual components at the time, to be betting on the Bucs. So we bet on the Saints. They won. Now, hey, it was an ugly performance, but hey, these types of games happen. You can't draw, broader macro conclusions from a single isolated game. And as we saw, that was pretty much, a bottoming point, right, Zach?
Yeah. And, interestingly, I wish I could be the whisperer of all teams like I was the Bucs last year, not to tout my own horn, but, capping the Bucs, I think I was 10-0 to start the season before the Rams Monday night game. And the reason is the reason I kind of want to touch on this is,
well, and you were 10-0 too, because meaning you weren't just picking the Bucs to cover and win every single game.
Yeah, I was fading them in the right spots, like the Saints game, like both Saints games, and the other losses as well against the spread. But the reason I think it's important is because moving forward for anybody is, I think if you can have a pulse on a team. Now, I think I have a special relationship with the Bucs because I used to be an avid fan growing up. And so I
Used to be?
Yeah, it used to be. I'm really not a fan of any team anymore. When the Bucs won their first Super Bowl,
You had a special twinkle in your eye last season.
well, because I felt so confident about what I was confident could and very probably would happen, which it then did, which was Bucs winning the Super Bowl. So I was bullish on the Bucs from preseason all the way through this season. Probably pop up some tweets around this time in the YouTube video, just to kind of demonstrate my conviction in them. And it's because, not as a homer, but I have that basis foundation of the Bucs organization like in my blood. The last 10 years I've been betting on sports, so like I've kind of like lost all allegiance. Like I don't actually follow the Bucs. Like, so once they got Tom Brady and once I realized how the team was trending in the right direction, minus Jameis Winston's turnover machine, it was kind of the best of both worlds of really knowing an organization like a fan, but not having the emotional allegiance to that organization like a fan, and having more of a sharp view of the market, how they perceive as outsiders of that team. And so obviously that's difficult to have, across the board on every team every year. But what I would recommend is anyone who has a strong pulse on a team in a given season. Maybe it'll duplicate this year on the Bucs. I'm pretty confident I know what they're going to do this season too. But if you know the Vikings and the Chiefs and the Lions, those are teams that you should probably find ways to bet throughout the season, right? Like when you have a team that you know how they function, you know when they yin, you know when they yang. Those are the teams that it's okay. Bet them 16 weeks, not 16. Bet them 10 weeks, right? Find your spots and go 8-2. Go 8-2 with the Lions. Don't do what we did, and I got pumped into the Eagles all season, and that was a disaster on that side. So obviously you can go
not just you. That was collective.
That was collective, but that was an example of know what you don't know. I knew the Bucs, so in theory, I know the team. I know the situations. Put my money into what I know. Let's not put it into a team, the Eagles, that, nobody knew what the hell the Eagles were because they didn't even know what they were. They were just a complete and utter crapshoot, and a bad one at that. So just for future reference, I think, take what you do know when it's not emotionally tied, like complete fandom. And, if you're doing well on a team, like find your spots to keep betting that team. Like don't let one loss on a team you are very confident in detract from betting them, and instead go to a team that you have like no clue what the heck they're even about as an organization, as a coaching staff, as quarterback. Like Eagles were a complete mess. So you have to have a strong pulse on the Eagles to even like bet for or against them. And so just a fair warning, I think, from my experience, is run with what you know.
I wouldn't be shocked if the Bucs defensive line smothers a hobbled Mahomes, and Mahomes has his worst NFL game you've ever seen. The Bucs defensive line is going to dominate them. 3.5 to me is like gimme. I think it's a great number. I actually even like the Bucs alt line minus 3.5. I'm flirting with minus 7.5, 10.5.
Well, I want to zero in here too. And again, just a reminder as we're looking at this chart. Again, the size of the bars here indicate broader market support for that team. So how many bettors, using the super contest picks as a proxy, how many bettors were betting on the Bucs on a particular week? And then the colors is whether or not the Bucs actually covered that spread. So in this instance, red being that they didn't cover the spread, that darker color being that they did cover the spread. And then those dots are basically demonstrating by how much they covered by or didn't cover by. Yellow dot being what that closing spread was. And what I want to really focus on here is just quick, at the close on the 2020 season is just, let's talk a little bit about how that shifting narrative kind of around the Bucs kind of materialized last season, and then kind of, the apex really was that, just total collapse. I think it was either Monday or Sunday Night Football versus the Saints there in that week 9, where we see that huge outlier dot. not covering by 30 plus points. And what we see here is, again, what the market, it looks like, how they interpreted the Bucs was the exact inverse of what we had projected at the beginning of the season, which was, be cautious on the Bucs over the course of the first half of the season plus, so say the first 10 weeks, be cautious. And then we expect for all that chemistry issues to resolve itself and then to actually play in their benefit. And that's when we started to see the Bucs then rattled off, 6 consecutive wins or whatever to close the season, and then obviously into the playoffs and winning the Super Bowl. But what we see here is actually that the market, for the most part, actually wanted to buy into the Bucs the first half of the season. So we see kind of an upward sloping level of support beginning at week 1 and kind of reaching its pinnacle there in week 10. And then after week 10, it basically kind of shifts lower. Then everyone started to actually abandon the team when they were actually performing at their best. So we see, they close the season ending, 4-2 against the spread, and including some, significant covers there. Especially we can see week 17, week 16, week 14. So, strong performance at the end of the season, but that's when bettors weren't capitalizing on it. Instead, they basically pocketed all those heavy losses the first half of the season.
Yeah, and I think that goes to the point I made about, obviously bettors didn't have a pulse on the Bucs, which is where, the confidence I think we had in the Bucs was from our confidence in the pulse on the Bucs, right? And it's from the work we do in preseason of recognizing Bucs didn't have an offseason, just like every team, but it was more important for the Bucs. They're breaking in a new quarterback, Tom Brady, first time ever outside of the Belichick regime. Tampa having new weapons, and they even introduced new weapons during the beginning of the season, right? And so with no offseason, Tom Brady didn't have a chance to get situated with his receivers, and he's learning a new playbook and stuff. So there's so many things working against the Bucs that, like if you're going to fade the Bucs, it's better to do it in the beginning of the season when they're inconsistent in and of themselves. And it's more likely that towards the latter half of the season, they're going to find a rhythm. They're going to find kind of what they're good at and where they can excel. And that's exactly what happened. And that's why from the preseason and through the season even, I was harping on Bucs futures is simply because it was an anticipation of the Bucs improvements. And because what you're betting on, right, is will Tom Brady figure it out? Because he's got loads of talent. That was the bet. Is Tom Brady, does he have a good defense? Yes. Does he have enough weapons around him? Yes. Can they figure it out in time to get to the playoffs? Absolutely. And then once in the playoffs, you have Tom Brady in the playoffs with a good defense. What more do you want? I mean, the upside is kind of what always sold me on the Bucs last season. And we'll talk about that moving into next season as well. But I think if we just do a quick overview of kind of their statistics from last season, which again are kind of not super important offensively, I think, because it was kind of a wishy-washy season because the Bucs were figuring out their identity for half the season. They still finished with 30 points a game, which obviously got boosted towards the latter half of the season when they figured out what they could do. Anything stick out from here though, Brett, as far as obviously offense ended up performing pretty well overall, but then defensively, their numbers were kind of not amazing. Like they were good, obviously, but takeaways, that's probably going to regress next season. I have a take on the Bucs defense, but we can get to that with the preview of next season if we want. But anything from this you want to pull away from?
No, I think that, you don't ever really want to rely too much on backwards looking statistics as a kind of forward looking strategy. As we see the teams, even the Bucs, a good example of, there wasn't a lot of turnover this season, and it's basically the exact same team. But this isn't a video game. It isn't the exact same players. Everyone's a year older, and 1 year to a 43-year-old quarterback is a meaningful, a meaningful year.
Yeah.
As it's always good to remember that quarterbacks, like Drew Brees, we saw it kind of happen over a course of a couple seasons. But, one thing that always sticks out to me is Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning was just awesome until he wasn't. And it happened basically overnight. And it just was gone. It was just gone. And you could totally see it. And in fact, that's when they won the Super Bowl. And and they won the Super Bowl in spite of him. Not because of him. And he just did enough to not turn the ball over, and wasn't a detraction to the team. So is that this year's Bucs team? I mean, because people always, this is one of those things. What happens is, especially like in financial markets, we're thinking about, a particular set of market participants are bearish on a stock. It kind of keeps going up. They try to sell it short. It rallies, sell it short, rallies, until you just keep losing and losing and losing. And then you throw your hands up and just give up and be like, I guess my thesis is wrong because it just keeps going up. And I think similarly, everyone has kind of predicted Tom Brady's demise every year. Like, he's too old. He's too old. He's too old. And he kind of just keeps proving people wrong.
I have a thought on
but
that.
Eventually that is going to happen. Unless he retires on top. But the thing is, I mean, again, this year, is better than last year to say that he's eventually going to drop off. They talked about, how he suffered with that MCL knee injury all of last season. And we can say, man, he's Superman. I can't believe he played through it. And it is super impressive. But it also does demonstrate that maybe last year did take a significant toll on him, more so than it did a typical year. So I feel like the fact that he played through that last year is not positive for this year. I think the wear and tear on him was significant last season. He might try to protect himself more this year. He's going to lose arm strength at some point in time.
And that is true. I would say, though, to caveat that is, I think the issue as a society, as a culture even, is we look at age as a number and not as a body of work, physically, literally, right? Is you can have jacked 70-year-olds at the gym, just fucking eating right and just buff and can kick your ass. And then you could have a 40-year-old who's overweight and has a heart attack and dies.
Oh, absolutely.
And so
look at Brett Favre. Brett Favre, when he was 38, so 6 years younger or something than Brady, looked like he was 75 years old.
Exactly. And I think the Brady, effect really is ultimately how much he puts into his own body to just be his optimal self. And so it's hard from that perspective to really know, well, when does that start to not work anymore? And it's got, to your point, it's going to happen. The question is we can't measure it by old standards of, well, he's about 40x years old. So who fucking knows? But the one thing
No, totally agree. But the thing is this is not, he is definitely well past his, what would typically be, a player's kind of final seasons. That's you in the past, it's 38, 39. I mean, again, it was very rare to get into your 40s and still be playing. Now he's, again, 43 and be 44, I think. He's well in, he's well past.
Yeah, but I would say I do have one more caveat. So I do think if you look at, he signed a 2-year contract, and this is kind of my big picture play on the Bucs in 2021, is they were not supposed to win it last year. The team, they started obviously to believe as the season.
It was supposed to be this year.
It was supposed to be this year, right? So what does that tell us? It tells us that they hit it right at the right time. But that wasn't even the anticipation. That wasn't even the expectation when Brady was coming in here. So he, and you can hear from some of his interviews and talking in the offseason, after they won the Super Bowl, he's telling his passing game coordinator, he's like, dude, let's get ready, man. We're going to be a better team next year, whether or not we can win it again, but we're going to be better. And so I think he has every anticipation of not taking a step off this year. Now, 2022, I think that argument probably is good to have. But I think for this year, there was no off season. So it's really just, it was a grueling 20 weeks. It was just a season. It was over, time off, boat parade, had some tequila. Now he's back. I just don't see it coming into play. And there's a lot of pressure release around the team, I think, with bringing in Gio Bernard as a pass catcher to come out of the backfield, much needed. having the receivers back. OJ Howard comes back healthy. The defense is going to be riled up. So, I mean, and their schedule, when we get to it, looks like one of the easiest schedules in the NFL. So, I mean, Brady can probably coast to an 11-12 win season, flirt with getting that bye. I mean, it's going to be tough sledding for the rest of the NFC, I feel like.
Yeah, well, and before we move on to the the additions and subtractions from this offseason, one stat I do want to point out actually is the sack percentage. So third, only 3.5%. That obviously extends Brady's longevity, is when they have such a strong offensive line. And as we know, they bring that whole line back and have, one of the best lines in the league. And Brady has really benefited from having a strong offensive line pretty much his whole career. The Patriots have always had, a top 10 or if not top 5 offensive line throughout most of his career as well. And then in addition to that, one of the things that I've always found so impressive about Tom Brady is he knows when and how to take a sack. So he does not put himself in bad positions in order that is, he can evaluate like the cost benefit of, very at a snap decision of whether or not to try to extend a play or just call it quits and live another, to see another day. And, that's why you see like Tom Brady can see a sack is coming. He just kind of bends down and falls over, doesn't take that hit to the knee or to the rib cage or gets slammed down and then hurts his shoulder. Like so many quarterbacks end up getting hurt because they're trying to, stupidly extend one single play. And then the cost is their career. And Brady has just, it's been just so obvious that he always tries to avoid that. And that's just another way that, he's been able to really extend the longevity of his career, is just having, that football IQ. And then again, having that strong offensive line, just makes those as those negative, adverse opportunities pop up, as limited as possible.
Well, and speaking of Tom Brady's IQ, and this is one of the stats that is not easily followed, but is getting PIs, pass interference calls. Tom Brady's, from the eye test, is the king of getting PI calls, and some pivotal plays throughout the playoffs, throughout the latter half of the season, throughout the season actually. And PI calls are being called more last season than any time before. Mm-hmm. But Tom Brady takes advantage of that because he has a high IQ. He knows how to put his team in position. And even his interceptions, he got a lot of flack for throwing 3 picks versus Green Bay, but it's like people didn't watch the plays. I mean, it was, 2 of them were like 3rd and long, and it was going to be a punt anyway. So he threw it up, gave his receiver a chance, got picked off. Like who cares? It's a punt. Like it's contextual if the pick is bad or not. And it was as good as a punt for 2 of them. So, I think his IQ, and that's why I was bullish about him joining the Bucs, was look at Jameis Winston's IQ, look at Tom Brady's IQ. It's night and day. It's literally complete opposites.
Yeah, and when you talk about Jameis Winston too, like throughout the whole first half of that season last year, when again it was a bumpy, choppy ride for the Bucs, there was just so many naysayers around how, Tom Brady's kind of so-so performance, like Bucs should have just kept Jameis Winston. I remember specifically after, again, the poor performance versus the Saints, a lot of, the PFF nerd crew kind of just coming out with, they could have gotten this from Jameis Winston and had the same downside and even more upside. And it just goes to show just how short-sighted and just lacking a broader kind of macro perspective that, again, some so-called experts in the space have. And again, it's one of the same reasons why they continue to have this hubris that they're so right, yet can't make any money in actually predicting future outcomes. But, they can always, assess what happened in the past with, expertise.
Yeah. It's much more difficult to put your money and your opinion on the line with making actual bets on teams. So we did, and we cashed. Probably had too
and so
too much Bucs future.
so looking at looking at the additions and loss, I think we can just quickly go through this one just because there's really not much to talk about. Gio Bernard, I think that is an addition that's kind of flying under the radar. And then I think you bring out a good point here. Vet's 1 year older. I think that is pretty much the main kind of possibly negative variable. Is just how does this all play together now? That again, Gronk is a year older, Brady's a year older. The team was particularly healthy last year, and again was pretty potent on defense as far as takeaways. So you expect to see some sort of regression there. I think Gio Bernard though is an addition because they got so many running backs now that they can just keep rotating that crew and putting in the right running back for the right situation, and they don't necessarily need to rely on any one running back, and try to pound them over the course of a game. Just having so many weapons at their disposal. And I think also it just speaks volumes how just this whole team is just bought in to the broader narrative, and that that this team is here to win the Super Bowl. And it's kind of like no one's thinking about themselves. They really truly are thinking about the broader collective team. And so I think that's going to pay dividends as well. Again, if there is any sort of bumpy aspects throughout the season, that this team's going to continue to stay bought in.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. So when we look at next season's schedule, the Bucs are favored, I think, in almost every game. Look at the schedule, bro. We got Cowboys, Falcons, Patriots, Dolphins, Eagles, Bears to start this season. Their only tough game right there is really Rams, and obviously a Patriots rematch can be tough with Belichick and Brady going at it to prove who's better.
That's like the highlight game.
And I'm sure they're going to be looking for that. That Rams game is a great spot to fade the Bucs, by the way. But if you look at the schedule, they got the Bills, they got the Colts, and that's it. That is it. If the Saints take a step back without Breeze,
and they're going to,
and they're definitely, and you're confident they will. Who do they play? They play the Bills and the Rams, right, and the Colts. That's it. If you really look at the schedule, this team very well, just from the schedule. Forget how good or not the Bucs are, but just from the schedule, this team very well could go 14-3 or 17 now. So
it's hard just because I think there's going to be, because this team is again long-term oriented. They're looking to win the Super Bowl. I think they realize their estimated strength of schedule here is 29.
I think
to kind of quantify your
estimated schedule is wrong. I think it's the easiest schedule in the NFL. Also situationally.
Well, this says it's pretty easy.
Yeah. So. And how these games are tight. Their last 3 games are the Panthers, Jets, and Panthers. It's
a great way to close the season.
If you struggle at all during the season, you're going to be feeling good those last 3 weeks. So anyway, you cut the schedule. It's super favorable. It reminds me of the Patriots schedules when Tom Brady was with the Patriots. It's just so easy. It's like, well, they're gonna win the division. They have to.
A dangerous scenario is you could see like a 3-game skid. So I could see Rams, Patriots, Dolphins, especially early on in the season, trying to get back into rhythm, kind of preserve the strength of maintain like the health of your team. Maybe aren't as aggressive to start the season, kind of win the games that you need to win, especially recognizing that again they have an easier schedule, so there's gonna be like blatantly like easier games to win out there. And again, I would not be surprised if again there is a certain point within the season where the broader kind of media and bettors abandon the Bucs. I think weeks 3, 4, 5 is definitely a good place. Again, I'm high on the Dolphins for sure. And
we may have our first disagreement there, so I like it. When we get to the Dolphins, we'll get into that one. I actually think that the toughest stretch might actually be after the bye with that Washington through to the Bills stretch, just because Washington Giants should have a pretty good defense, and if they have any kind of offensive output, which seems probably not likely. That could be a tough stretch with the Colts and the Bills in that mix. So yeah, really after the bye, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if this team's undefeated going into the bye. And that's why if you want to bet the Bucs this year, I mean, just go ahead and take. I mean, I've been pounding the table on the Bucs since before they were in the Super Bowl. I was saying, hey, I think there's going to be a rematch. Before the Super Bowl was played, I was calling for Chiefs-Bucs rematch. And obviously, any injury, key injury, that's not going to happen. But as far as value, I think the Bucs were plus 1,200 before this previous Super Bowl to get it to the next Super Bowl, right? So now the line's obviously come down, plus 650. I don't see it getting any better. It's just going to keep coming down because the Bucs are going to win at least. They're going to go 80% of these games. They're going to win in the first half of the season. So, I mean, if you like the Bucs, I would take some Super Bowl, winning some NFC, and just for the people who go, oh well, that's easy. You're picking the same team to win the Super Bowl that you picked last year, and they won it, and they're going to win it again. That never happens. Let me give you some stats. Actually, it does happen. So remember last year, who was in the Super Bowl? The Chiefs. Who won the Super Bowl the year before? The Chiefs. So there's obviously very recent precedent for teams to ascend to the top of the mountain and then do it again the next year. And obviously the Chiefs laid an egg in the Super Bowl, but they were outmatched and they were banged up, and a lot of things were going against them that the market didn't pick up on. But before that, what do we have? We had the Patriots, 2017, 18, and 19 with, guess who? Tom Brady. That's 3 years in a row. Who was in the Super Bowl? That was Mr. Brady, right? He won 2 of them, not back to back. But again, I like the kind of futures where let me get my team to the game, because if I can get Bucs plus 650 to get to the Super Bowl, whoever they play, I mean, that gives me a ton of freedom. They're probably going to be a pick 'em or a favorite. I can swing half that to the other side if I want.
Remember, the thing is, though, I do want to bring back to our attention is again, when we would see disappointing Bucs game, and one outlier downside that we saw even for the Super Bowl, and again, we thought that, it would be overcome by so many other positive kind of angles that would make it moot. But the play calling and the coaching,
I agree,
is not necessarily a strength of this team.
No.
And so that in itself opens the door to losing games that maybe you otherwise should win.
And I
certainly,
think, to your point, I think more so against good teams, right? So I think the Bucs are going to make the playoffs if they're healthy. They're probably going to maybe even get the bye. The playoffs is where I think that comes into play. That's why I obviously don't over leverage into Bucs futures. But, Byron Leftwich is one of the worst play callers, I think, in the NFL. I mean, he's predictably running the ball first and second down and then putting Tom Brady in 3rd and 8s, and then Tom Brady bails them out. I mean, that's really what happened almost all season.
That happened tons.
I was even live tweeting out of frustration during the Saints game in the playoffs about how miserable the Bucs play calling was the first quarter of the game. The first, before the Bucs started finding some rhythm and getting interceptions on Drew Brees. And, you could see it in the Super Bowl too. The first quarter, I was like, man, these defenses are dominating the game. Now, the difference was I was confident the Bucs defense was going to stay dominant and the Chiefs defense was going to relent because they're actually not that good. But, I mean, it's the play calling all season. I don't think it ever progressed. I think Leftwich has a kind of probably old school mentality of how play calling should go and doesn't really take into consideration the analytics, kind of like a Jason Garrett would, and just kind of does what he wants to do based on what he thinks works. And there's no, second guessing himself, trying something different. And I think it came down to Tom Brady just making him look good, which Brady can do. Great quarterbacks can it's like good actors. Good actors can make bad scripts look amazing. And vice versa. So I'm pretty sure Brady was the one that carried that team and that offense. And obviously they had a ton of weapons, but yeah, to your point.
The other thing I was thinking about here too is it's not like the Bucs had amazing health, especially at the wide receiver position over the course of last season. So Brady had to kind of constantly have some sort of rotating crop of wide receivers that he was working with in any particular week. And again, they brought on, Antonio Brown kind of later on. And so now you get this kind of, if the wide receiver crew can especially stay healthy, I mean, this is definitely the best in the league, I feel like, by far. And if they can stay healthy, then that gives it even more opportunity to really gel and kind of build on and capitalize on that sort of chemistry there. And if Antonio Brown can really return to form, because he closed the season strong, especially like in the playoffs. But he was by no means a superstar, kind of like he was a few years ago. But man, if they can benefit from him in a meaningful way, and I mean with Mike Evans, and it's just like,
and then Scotty Miller's speedster when you need him, and then OJ Howard and Cameron Brake, Gronk.
Yeah, and OJ Howard was playing well before he got injured.
And then Gio Bernard out of the backfield on third downs. I mean, that's, again, honestly, if they had Andy Reid or Sean Payton type play caller,
yeah,
I mean, this could become the best offense ever. Like just from
absolutely.
If they wanted to blow.
But that's why you cannot discount the coaching, though.
Yeah,
like
that's a good point.
It is a problem.
That's fair. That is a very fair point. And real quick to kind of wrap out, I think on the Bucs generally, as far as the team makeup is concerned, is another weak point. So I know we've been touting Bucs. I think they're going to win the Super Bowl again, or get to the Super Bowl at least. But I think play calling is their Achilles heel. I think their secondary Achilles heel is their secondary. Obviously, they have a very good front seven. I think the back end is where they also got bailed out by turnovers. They got bailed out by not getting penalty called on them when maybe they should have, versus other teams getting penalties called on them, kind of like in the Vikings game during the regular season. And obviously in the playoffs, there's a lot of controversy with some calls that went one way, not the other. And so, they have young players that have some talent, but there's a reason why Tyreek Hill had 250 yards receiving against the Bucs the first time, right? That's probably more the Bucs secondary than like the Super Bowl, right? Because the secondary obviously benefits if you get massive pressure. You only have to guard for 1 second. So I think if the Bucs front seven is going to struggle versus good offensive lines, that secondary is going to give up 24, 27 points. So just kind of like, if you're looking for when to bet, teams that have good O-lines and can score the ball, like the Rams week 3, maybe like the Cowboys even week 1, maybe Colts, Bills as we get into the later part of the season. I think those are probably your spots where consider betting the other team and the spread. That's
Makes sense.
My 2 cents on those two Achilles heels of the Bucs if they're going to go down, which I don't think they will. I think they're going to win the NFC.
Makes sense. All right. I think that wraps up today's episode previewing the Tampa Bay Bucs. So be sure to like and subscribe. Check out SportfolioKings.com, where we're going to continue to start to build out tools. We'll be releasing those over the next couple weeks, but you can definitely sign up there. Make sure that you get an alert as soon as they become available. We're going to have all different sorts of market-oriented research, the type of kind of content and proprietary ways of looking at the broader kind of marketplace in ways that isn't being done by many platforms out there today. We're going to have a custom market signals dashboard. We're going to, of course, over the course of the season, have our own in-house, what we call managed sportfolios, where we'll make our own picks over the course of the season based on leveraging the tools at our disposal. And we'll be providing that to you for free. So to all subscribers all season long and pretty much forever, because we're big believers in not necessarily selling picks. That picks is one of those things. This is the way we're seeing the market. What we want to provide you is tools to help you understand the market. And if you need help kind of coming to a final conclusion, and you can see the way we're leaning, but that's the way we're leaning. We're not making picks for you. We're making picks for us. And if you want some transparency and to see, have a perspective into that, we're happy to provide that. So like you can probably see, this ain't going to be your daddy's sports betting So let's get out there. Let's get prepped to start taking your bookie to the woodshed.
And king me.